All right, welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation Bridging the Gap with Rex
and Eva.
And we are so excited to hang out with you guys. It is Sunday
night.
Yeah, is
yeah,
that okay?
It is.
I always look at you because you're like, why do you keep
dating? No, it is Sunday night. But it is earlier than when we usually record on Sunday night.
Yes, it is.
It is just about as dark, though. It got dark at 3:45 today because of the rain.
Yep.
It was the most depressing thing. I'm dog sitting right now, and I fed the dogs an hour earlier than I was supposed to because the darkness threw me off.
Yeah.
And so they got fed an hour earlier today.
Well, you're right. It did get dark about an hour early due to the overcast conditions. And so, but it is Sunday afternoon, and it is the day prior to Veterans Day.
Yep.
And so that's going to be the obvious topic. There's a lot of things we could talk about this week. We could talk about post-election results. We're going to save that.
Soon, probably.
Yep. We're going to save that for another episode, let things kind of cool off just a little bit. But tomorrow is a big day for our country, for anyone that has served in the military, actually for any citizen that has enjoyed the freedoms that we have in this country. So we get to celebrate. The college that we are associated with here in town is actually holding a second annual Veterans Day ceremony, and can't wait to gather with those veterans in the morning. We're going to do breakfast at 8 o'clock and then do a 1 hour ceremony at 9. So anyway, really excited about it. So
you're part of those people that helped us have the freedoms we have today. So thank you.
Well, you are more than welcome. You were worth it. The country is worth it. And we're talking about that a little bit more.
Of course.
So maybe let's just do a quick background on.
I have a question starting that.
You have questions,
I do.
Okay.
I can start right off. I can interview you on this because it brings me through it. Okay. So you were in the military, right?
22 years in the active duty Army.
Okay. So we're going to get to why Veterans Day is important, but let's get some background, like we said, right? What initially inspired you to join the military, and why did you do it?
Wow, that's a great question, and we have not rehearsed this, so you're responding to me, I'll respond to you. Be ready for curveballs.
Yeah.
Especially when people ask you
I'll go ahead and
questions.
give you a
No,
the next one.
No.
Do you want to know the next one?
I don't want to know the next one.
I was like, I'll give you the next one so you can start thinking
Let's answer the first one first.
Perfect.
What inspired me and what made me think about going into the military?
Yep.
Let me give you the background. First of all, I really had no desire to go in the military when I was your age at 18. The Vietnam War had been winding down since about 1972. So about the time I entered into high school, but you've heard me mention this before, it was really the first war that we saw immediately on television, and there were body bags, and we saw that. And for a high school kid or a junior high kid, that kind of scared you a little bit. You're like, man, I sure don't want to do that. And I can remember standing on one of my best friend's front doorstep, and his mother, my senior year of high school, she said, Rex, what do you think you want to do as you guys, a group of friends entering into college, what do you think you're going to go to school for? What do you think you want to do after college? And I said, I really don't know, but I can tell you one thing, it's not the military, because I was scared of what I saw on television. Well, 4 years later into my college career, things change. And I thought, you know what? I don't think military service would be so bad.
Wait, 4 years in? I thought you did ROTC.
I did do ROTC, so 3 years into my college career. But, I'm just saying 4 years in to the college experience, 3 years, I was a junior. I just started thinking about, man, I am going to graduate, and I'm really still not sure what I want to do. And maybe the military would not be that bad, and maybe I could learn some things. And so I decided to enter ROTC. There's a long story with that. Thank God for, at the time, Captain Tim Walters. Tim Walters helped change my life because he introduced me to the Army. The Army introduced me to how big the world is, and went on active duty. And again, I thought I was going to serve 4 years, maybe grow up a little bit more, get mature, and then get out and pursue whatever career I felt like God had for me. And 22 years later, I retired from the Army, and I loved every minute of it. So that's kind of what drew me. And Paul, my dad, your grandfather, was a World War II veteran, U.S. Navy, and I was extremely attracted to the personal discipline that Paul had. He was a member of the Greatest Generation, and you know, part of our podcast, we don't like the labels that get attached to each generation.
But it's a good way to differentiate the time period.
It is, and in that case, I truly believe that they were the Greatest Generation, because you got to remember, those were 18-year-old kids that went off to war halfway across the world to places that many of them had never even heard of, didn't know they existed. And I think I told this story. After Paul passed away, I was going through the last little bit of stuff that his personal things in the house, and there was a box, and I opened that box, and it was his deck jacket. They had a canvas jacket that they wore on the deck of a ship when it was their turn for watch, because let's face it gets cold out in the Pacific on during the night. And so as I was holding that deck jacket, I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I had this view of my 90-year-old dad in that jacket, and it hit me. I'm like, your 90-year-old dad never wore this jacket. An 18-year-old boy wore this jacket. And it was just a moment that I had. I'm like, he was 18 years old, and millions of them went to Europe, went to Asia, and they fought on our behalf. And the world is different because of their sacrifice. So that's what kind of drew me. There was a family connection, but I just thought, let's give this a shot. And it's 22. I've had a great life, Eva, but those 22 years were fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really cool. I like hearing you like talk about that, because I've heard like bits and pieces over the years. So like to hear the full timeline is really cool. Okay. So my next question is, you were talking about you learned discipline. That was a big thing for you. So what were some of the values that you took away from your time in the military, and how have they influenced your life?
Okay, first of all, you mentioned the word discipline, and you've heard me say this before. If you look at the challenges that most people have in their life, including you and me, every challenge comes, I think, from a lack of discipline. Somewhere there's a breakdown in personal discipline, either in our physical conditioning, in our financial management, in our ability to mentally process things, even in our spiritual life. Anytime that we find a problem and we're struggling to get over an obstacle, I will tell you this again, this is personal opinion, but there's a book, I've mentioned it on podcasts before. I'm a big Ryan Holiday fan. The name of the book is Discipline is Destiny. So if we don't have discipline in our life, you name the area, you're learning this as a high school senior, as you're doing your thesis. If you're not disciplined in that approach, you're going to have challenges and struggles. And the more disciplined we are in our habits and in our thoughts, the better off we're going to be in the end result. So my first answer is discipline. But then the values that I learned are the Army values. And they use an acronym, leadership, LDRSHIP. I have carried those values with me all of my life.
So what does leadership stand for?
Okay, leadership stands for, the L is loyalty. D is duty.
Okay.
R is respect.
Okay.
S, selfless service. H, honor. I, integrity. P, personal courage. 7 values, leadership. LDRSHIP. Those
I feel like you're a good model, a lot of those.
Well, thank you
You
very
had
much.
22 years to figure that out.
Had 22 years to practice that. But even though that's the acronym the Army came up with, the Navy, all of our services have different values, and some of them are nested within each other. But the truth is, I saw Paul as a Navy veteran. He lived out the leadership acronym. He lived that out in front of
Do you
me.
know what I just realized?
What?
We're talking about how crazy it is. He went to war at 18. He lived in Arkansas. He probably, at that point, from his history, had never seen the ocean. And he was now all of a sudden on boats.
Right.
Like, working full time on boats in the middle of across the world.
Yep.
That's just like, that just hit me how big that is. He
That's
came from the
huge.
Midwest. So it's not like he went into the Army and continued working on with the land. No, he went straight to the water. And that, I don't know, that's just massive. If you have never, seen boats that big, I just feel like, or war, it's just,
Yeah.
wow.
Think about that. Yeah, that's a wow thing. You have never, I think Paul had been out of the state maybe one time. He worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. That was a federal program to help get the country back on their feet after the Depression. And so I have a lot of notes on this that I'll give you one of these days. But he went to Des Moines, Iowa, actually,
Interesting.
and worked in the CCC camps.
That's awesome.
And then, but you're right. So he'd been out of the state one time, and then all of a sudden he's on a boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And if Paul were here as a sailor, he would correct you for saying the term boat. The Navy does not have boats.
Ships.
The Navy has ships.
Yeah.
Fishermen have boats.
If Millie was sitting here, I'd probably get corrected too.
That's cool. I'm
yeah.
glad that you
That,
kind of had that
realization hit
little moment.
Light
That's a
bulb.
big deal.
Yeah,
And
okay.
18-year-olds
Like my age.
Yes.
If I had
your
never seen the
age.
ocean, had no idea what war looked like because there wasn't a media source like that, and all of a sudden I'm halfway across the world. I mean, heck, now if I was across the world on a boat, a ship in the Pacific Ocean, I would still be in shock. So it's just crazy. Like, that just hit me how big their sacrifice was.
Yes.
So moving on.
Okay.
Talking about sacrifice. Wow, I perfectly bridged that. What do you think is the most important thing for people to understand about the sacrifices veterans make or made?
Okay. Well, that
So what is maybe not the most important? What is one of the things you think, like, civilian people who have not ever been in that experience should understand about the sacrifices veterans make or made?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'm going to answer it this way: in that sometimes soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. So when I say soldier, that's encompassing all four services. Sometimes we use that in a generic way. Soldiers sometimes do not understand civilians because at the core of it's called the military service for a reason. We are in the service of our country. We are in the service of the United States Constitution. We are in the service of the citizenry. And so therefore, when we come off of active duty, even for those that serve in the National Guard, the Reserve Forces, sometimes we have a hard problem or a hard time understanding civilians
That's
that
one
have
of my
never
questions,
served
so.
because they don't understand this concept of sacrifice the way that we do. Part of being an American is being willing to sacrifice on behalf of your country, on behalf of your community, on behalf of your family, and it's not always going to be in your self-interest. That's what brings veterans together. Matter of fact, Eva, I love walking into a room of veterans. I did it the other day. I went over to Columbus, Georgia. I had lunch scheduled with a group of 14 veterans that I had never met in my life, and the minute I walked in the room, it was like we were long lost family because we knew we shared a common bond, common values, and we understand sacrifice.
Yep.
So does that answer the question?
It does. So moving on. Wow, we're really bridging these really well.
Okay.
Bridging the gap. Exactly. Anyway, how do you feel society can best support veterans and active duty service members? So we've talked about how they don't understand civilians as much. So how can civilians support them? Not talking about celebrating them. We'll get to that. But, like, how can we support them?
I think to recognize the fact that they did something that some of us are not willing to do. I have people tell me that all the time. Thank you for your service. Well, we embrace that and we're grateful for that. But when a person, I would take it one step further. When you go up to a veteran and you say, hey, and you see they have a hat on and it says Army veteran, Navy veteran, whatever it is. Well, I think that's great that people are willing to walk over and say, hey, sir, or hey, ma'am, thank you for your service. We're extremely grateful. But if you have the time, I would take it one step further and say, hey, tell me one thing about what you liked about your military service. Or, hey, take a minute and tell me where you served. Because in that moment, by asking them one additional question, you are showing them that you genuinely care about their experience that they had as a veteran. And it's not just a cliche or a routine that you're repeating out of a sense of duty that you just need to walk over and say, hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Again, don't get me wrong. That's great that we do
But
that.
it goes deeper than the surface level gratitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go over and talk to them.
Yeah.
Ask them a question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is there someone is there someone you served with who has deeply impacted you? And how do you honor or remember them, especially on Veterans Day?
Oh yeah, I almost there's a piece of me that hates to answer that question because there's so many people that impacted me. The night I retired, Eva, this is a cool story.
I don't think I've heard it.
You haven't heard it. The night that I retired after 22 years, and I really struggled with it, by the way, wasn't sure that I was ready to retire. I almost asked my commander to pull my retirement paperwork out, and I was going to continue to serve. But I felt like I had already made the commitment to your mom that it was time for me to experience life after the military. And I will say that to those younger veterans that are still on active duty, hey, thank you so much for what you men and women are doing. We appreciate you every day and the sacrifice you make. But I will encourage you, someday when it's over, there is life after the military. And some of us have greater challenges than others adapting to that. But in terms of the people, the night before I retired, I went out to, there was a football field at Fort Knox, and I went out on the football field and I just walked from one end of the field to the other. And I thought about every non-commissioned officer and every officer that I had served with over the past 22 years. And I smiled, I chuckled, shed a few tears about the different people that had impacted my life. And I just wanted to honor them, you know, in that way. And so tomorrow I will spend a day, I will go to the Veterans Day ceremony that we're going to do at 8 o'clock. Then the construction company that I used to work for, we started a Veterans Day ceremony almost 14 years ago. And I have led that ceremony for 14 years. And they always ask me, would you be willing to come back?
And you haven't worked there
I haven't worked there in almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And so the answer is, as long as I am able and you invite me, I will be back every year and we will celebrate Veterans Day together. And we read a list. It's called our Cadell Veterans Honor Roll. And we read a list of every family member and every Cadell construction employee that has ever served in the military.
Wow.
And it is a powerful moment, and I wouldn't miss it. You couldn't drag me away with wild horses, as the old saying goes. But you ask about one specific person, and it's hard to narrow one person down, but I'm going to tell you about one, and his name is Stephen Sakuma. Stephen Sakuma is a second-generation Japanese American. His family was incarcerated as part of the camps that we set up on the West Coast in World War II because we were, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we had a fear that there were loyalties in the Japanese population that was already in America, that their loyalties might lie with Japan. And it was a fear-based action that we took, and it's an embarrassment to our government. We never should have done it, but we basically interred multiple Japanese families or families of Japanese descent, especially on the West Coast. Stephen Sakuma's family was one of those families that was put into a camp.
Wow.
And I visited him years later. They owned a farm up in Washington State. And I asked him, who took care of the farm while your parents were in the camp? And he said, our neighbors did. And when we got out, or when my parents got out, they handed them the keys to the house that they had taken care of, and they gave the farm back to them. And I said, you went through that as a family, and you still enlisted in the United States Army. And he said, I love my country. And so Stephen Sakuma has always been a great example to me of things that have not necessarily always gone right in our country. We have mistreated people. We have done things like any other country that have not been our finest moments. But at the end of the day, I believe with all my heart that people that serve this country, they love it. They have its best interest at heart. We're for each other. And Stephen Sakuma, a second generation Japanese American that had a right to hold a grudge against our country, he didn't. He loved our country. And as far as I'm concerned, he was the ultimate warrior that I served with. He was my battalion commander when I was a senior lieutenant and was promoted to captain under his command. And serving under Stephen and Penny Sakuma was one of the great honors of my life. And I'm sorry, get a little emotional.
It's all right.
But Steve is kind of suffering from some memory issues at this stage in his life. And so all of us have really done our very best to keep in touch with Penny. I've never called anybody else mom, but Penny Sakuma, I honor her and Steve and the way they led us so much that when I think about her, she's mom. And so, Mom, if you're listening, tell Steve we love him, love you, and thank you so much for your sacrifice to our country on behalf of our country. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for the way that you and Steve led us during your time as the battalion commander, 7th Field Artillery, 7th Battalion, 8th Field Artillery, Red Dragons.
Well, that's...
Now I got you choked up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really...
It's okay.
Okay.
All right. Next question.
Okay. So there's two more.
Yep.
The whole point of our podcast. What advice would you give to young people considering the military today?
Okay. The military is obviously different than when I served. I think you have to be conscious of that. Things change. It was different for Paul. World War II was different for him. The things that he did, the areas that he served in, some of the regulations changed. So I would say the same thing. I served from 1984 to 2006. You're handing me a handkerchief. Thank you very much, so that I can dry these tears. So it's just different. And it's not so much that the service changes, the world changes and culture changes. But I would tell any young person that is considering military service, I don't see how it can hurt you. Anything that is designed to function on behalf of others, to where your primary purpose is to defend the nation, to serve the nation, and to serve its people, I would like for anyone to explain to me how that's a bad thing. Yeah. And I get it. You know, I ask people all the time, did you enjoy your time in service? Some people did not enjoy it as much as others. I get that. But I've never found a person yet that told me that they were not proud to wear the uniform and that they were proud of what they did in their time in service. So that's how I would answer that.
Awesome. That's a good answer. So my final question, so this will go out on Veterans Day, okay?
Yep.
So everybody celebrates Veterans Day a little differently. Some people are just excited to have a day off work or school. Some people, like you, use it as a day to remember everybody you served with. Some people do it to honor their family members. How should we celebrate veterans? What is a meaningful way for people to honor or celebrate veterans, in your opinion? So we've talked about what you do, but what are some of the meaningful ways we can celebrate, especially if you're unfamiliar with, like, if you don't have anybody in your family who's in the military or know anybody? How can we honor them still?
Yeah, well, that's a two-part answer, because you just alluded to something. A lot of people don't have experience with military families, and that's true. Right now, there are roughly 16 million veterans in the country. That includes people that are on active duty. That includes people that have served on active duty, National Guard, or Reserve. So 16 million. That is roughly 6% of the population. So 94% of the population has not served. It's not even half of Texas. And that's totally okay. Well, I'm not sure what the population is of Texas.
It's 31
what is
million.
it? Is it 31 million?
I
didn't know
Googled it
that.
because we were talking about it in government. So it's
well,
half
that's
of
great.
Texas.
So it's half of Texas.
Comparison.
Let me give you another comparison. The metropolitan area, metro population of New York is right at 20 million. So think about that. The amount of people that bear the classification of veteran will not even fill up New York City metro area. So
that's just New York City proper.
Yeah. Well, New York City proper and all the boroughs
Yeah, yes.
and the extended suburbs.
Oh, okay.
Just like Birmingham. Birmingham, I think that if you look at the stats, Birmingham itself is about 200,000 within the city limits. But if you go out and you
Go to
begin
Hoover and Chelsea and Alabaster and Pelham.
then you're pushing one. I hadn't looked at stats recently, but
it's
you're
enough
it's
that-
over a million. So
Yeah.
you get my point. New York City, all of that area is about 20 million, where your veterans in the country right now couldn't even fill that up. So it is a declining population. Matter of fact, I read something recently that shocked me. The veteran population has declined in this country 20% in the last 20 years. And I didn't look it up to see what caused that. I am assuming that it is the World War II generation. There were so many of them. There were roughly 16 million World War II veterans, and many of them, as your grandfather, they have passed away in the last 10 years. And so, depending on what statistics you read, there are less than 100,000 left. Think about that.
Wow.
There were 16 million people that
That just tells you
served
how-
in World War II.
It's been a small amount of time over the course of history since World War II, but in the everyday life, it's been long enough that this generation's almost completely gone. Like
Yeah.
they've already passed.
They
That's
were
crazy.
they're 18 years old when they went, and now most of them, the youngest of them, are passing away in the next few years. 131. This is coming from the World War II Museum in New Orleans. They estimate that 131 World War II vets pass away every day. So at this point, less than 100,000 of them left. And again, you have less, right at 6% of the population that are veterans. So how do we honor them? I would say, hey, maybe do something you haven't done. Matter of fact, right here in Birmingham, we have the nation's oldest Veterans Day parade.
Oh, in
Did you
Birmingham.
know that?
I just learned about that at math tutoring like 2 hours ago. Somebody's going to it because his grandfather is a veteran. And so
Yeah.
the whole family goes every year to honor all of the veterans in the city.
Yep. And matter of fact, this is going out. So if you're local, 1:00 tomorrow downtown, there will be the annual Birmingham Veterans Day
And
parade.
look for
And
the
again, it
Veterans
is
Day
the
things
oldest
in your-
one.
Yeah, and look for the Veterans Day celebrations happening in your city if you're not local, because I can bet you they're happening.
Yeah, and just like if you don't, I mean, you may say, well, what, my city doesn't have a parade. My city doesn't have any type of ceremony. I will guarantee you, if you will go to the Chamber of Commerce, there is probably some type of Veterans Day remembrance, but you can do what I did at Cadell Construction. I just went to the senior vice president and I said, hey, what do you think about this ideal? And he said, I love it. And so we started our own Veterans Day remembrance. And again, it doesn't take long. It takes about 20 minutes to go through the roll call of, again, those people that have served and family members that have served. I normally give some comments about the significance of Veterans Day, and that's it. But it's just a time for us to remember who we are as a
And I
country.
want to add one more thing I think
Okay.
is extremely important is our celebration of them doesn't need to stop after Veterans Day, because they made it so we can live in a free country every day. Our celebration of them shouldn't only last a day. And I think just asking about their stories and what they learned, like I've asked you, what are some of the things you learned? How did it shape you? How has it impacted your life? Right? It's a great way to honor their legacy, because some of them may not have anybody to remember them when they're gone. And by honoring their legacy and who they are, you're helping immortalize their work and the service they brought to our country to guarantee our freedoms. So I think that is an extremely important thing too, is after Veterans Day is over at 11:59 tomorrow night, our celebration of them should not stop.
I think that's great. That's a great thought, Eva. And here's something I'd like to leave you with, because you were asking me what's the biggest thing in terms of sacrifice. I came up with this phrase. Again, most of our listeners know I am a pastor, I am a soldier, and I am comfortable with both of those things. I'm 100% pastor. I love people. I'm called. That is a calling. It's not a career. But I'm 100% soldier too. You never forget the things that you've learned, the things you've seen, experienced as a soldier. So I tell people, hey, I'm not confused. I am both. And I approach life as a pastor and as a soldier. And here's every memorial service that I get asked to do for a soldier. It is going to contain the following 3 words. And I always tell the family members, here's what your service member did. What they did as a veteran, it was not comfortable, it was not convenient, and it was not cheap. And that's what I'd like to leave with you as the daughter of a veteran and the granddaughter of a veteran. That's what I'd like you to carry forward. When you talk to, long after I'm gone, Eva, when you talk to people about me, you're going to say whatever is on your heart. But one of the things I'd like you to remind them about veterans, it is not comfortable, it is not convenient, and it is certainly not cheap. And when you have a friend buried in Arlington National Cemetery like I do, you know it's not cheap. The very first cadet that I commissioned, I wanted to teach Army ROTC so bad as part of my career because Captain at the time, Captain Tim Walters, did that for me. He recruited me. He taught me about the Army. He taught me my ROTC classes. He set me on a career path in the Army, and he set a great example for me. And I wanted to do that so bad for other college students that as part of my career, I asked to be assigned as an Army ROTC instructor. Well, here's what you need to know about that. The very first cadet that I commissioned at Troy University, that cadet was buried 2 years later he came back from Iraq in a body bag, okay? And he's buried at Fort Benning, which is now Fort Moore. But I went to his funeral, and I can't tell you what that did to my heart, that I had such high hopes for him. He had already served. He was enlisted, and he came off active duty in what's called the Green to Gold program, where they could go from green to getting their gold bar as a second lieutenant. And he did that. And I may be off a couple of years. I think I commissioned him in 1999, and I think in 04. So it was probably 5 years. Again, I may be off, but I just remember that the very first, I've never forgotten it, the very first cadet, and when I stood and saluted his wife, I just thought about all the hopes that I personally had for him to be an officer in the United States Army, which he was, and he gladly gave his life in the service of his country. And his name is Captain Rob Sheets. I will never forget Captain Rob Sheets. And so again, that's not a morbid story.
No,
I don't tell you that.
His journey may have been short, but his sacrifice was not no smaller because of that.
Absolutely. So you've got it.
Yeah.
When you talk about veterans in the future, what's the 3 C's? It's not convenient, it's not comfortable, and it's not cheap. Okay?
It's really good.
All right.
Thank you for your service and for telling me about it.
Well, thank you for some really great questions tonight. I loved hanging out with you, Eva.
did.
This has been a good episode. For the emotional part of it, y'all, for the listeners, didn't mean to do that. But hey, this is a heart thing. When you see a soldier, sometimes I think there's that misperception too, that soldiers are hard, they have no feelings, they have no emotions.
They just learned how to mask them.
They've learned how to mask them, and in most cases, we do that. And you know that about me. In most cases, I do that. But when I start talking about somebody that impacted my life as much as Stephen Sakuma did, you kind of lose it a little bit.
People talk about Army Rex as the super serious person, but I personally think Army Rex is the person that can show his emotions like that and understand sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so that's how I view you. People talk about, oh, you don't want to see Army Rex. And I'm like, no, because it makes me cry. Like when you talk about Army Rex, I don't see the serious and stern part. I see the friend and the person who cared so deeply about all of these people that he served with.
Well,
I mean, I know Army Rex serious exists.
Yeah,
but the classification of you in my head as Army Rex is not a serious person.
Because I've tried not to be that way with you.
Yeah.
And again, I think some people have a misperception about that, about how hard Army people are. And it's not that we're hard. We're given a set of standards, and we're given a mission. And we're gonna live up to every standard. We're gonna accomplish the mission, and that's it.
I probably
There's no
really
question.
confused you.
Why?
The first couple years of my life when I was figuring out how to do everything, and I would not do it. I would not follow the mission of how I was supposed to do something. You tell me exactly how to do it, and I still wouldn't do it the way you told me. That was probably the biggest learning curve, because you retired in what, 05?
I did.
And I was born like
I retired in 06.
06.
So
and I was born like 6 months later.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm like going from that serious and stern to, I remember you telling that story of having to sit and comfort me, because I was like, why do they not like me? Or something. I'm like, that's my father was not Army Rex. My father was Rex Davis.
Well,
so
thank you so much. A funny story. The first job I took after the military, I was hired as an operations manager at a small construction firm that was just getting started. And they had multiple government contracts, but they didn't have any policies and procedures, and they needed somebody to come in and help them write, hey, how do you operate this company? How do you set boundaries and parameters in place? And they said, we think you can take your military experience and do that for us. And I said, I'd love the challenge. And I met with several of the management team, and I thought, man, this is going to be awesome. Well, within the first week that I was at work, I was telling somebody to move a bulldozer loaded up on one of the low boys and take it to job X. And so when I said that, they said, well, so-and-so took that bulldozer at 6 this morning and it's gone to job Y. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, well, who signed that out? Well, they said, well, nobody. They just went back there and got it. And I'm like, well, that's part of the problem we have here. You don't just go back to an equipment yard and load a bulldozer and haul it off to a job site that you necessarily hadn't been told that's the job site that we're going to today.
Because it wasn't.
And so, because it wasn't. And so for a soldier that is used to everything being accounted for inside, when you pull a piece of equipment out, no matter how large or how small it is, you sign for it. You go to the arms room, you sign for your individual weapon. You sign for the piece of equipment. You don't just go grab it and take off with it. And so I was bewildered. And so most civilians need to know that when soldiers are transitioning, it is extremely hard for them, because they go from this very structured environment into
chaos.
Well, sometimes it is chaos. And I tell people, companies can learn a lot by the way that the military runs their organization. So anyway,
this has been wonderful.
That's a different aside, but thank you so much. It was good hanging out with you. Yeah.
About this, not with this. I love talking to you about this.
Yeah. And so with that, let's sign off, and always remember,
let's always be able to talk from generation to generation. Hey, if you enjoyed our episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave a review, because it helps people who don't know about us hear our message. And if you want to follow us on our socials, follow us at G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.